Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
WESN.
It's a beautiful day in TNT. Welcome to AM Prime, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being with us this morning. Lots of conversations to get into, and quite a number of interesting conversations, actually, particularly within the first hour. Starting off with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, there have been rumors or suggestions, according to one media report. I'm still trying to verify these rumors or suggestions myself, and I'm hoping to get some sort of clarification this morning, that there is assassins within the TTPS because of excessive police killings. Now, I believe 21 people have been killed by the hands of police in 2024, although there is context to add to that figure. And also the police oftentimes may find themselves between a rock and a hard place when it comes to shootouts with alleged criminals. But we'll get into that conversation this morning as I'm joined by the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Social and Welfare Association, Mr. Gideon Dixon. Good morning, ASP. Good morning, ASP Dixon. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Mr. Shah. Good morning to your viewership.
Thanks for joining us this morning. Have you heard of this rumor or suggestions that there's a gang of assassins within the TTPS targeting individuals, and this particular gang of officers do not wear body cameras? This is just a normal thing within the TTPS.
Mr. Shah, I have not heard that, and that statement is so far from the truth that I can't even start to imagine. Most times when you speak of gang, they have their own modus operandi. The police officers who have responded to the over 430 plus murders for 2024, we are not part of a gang. We are civic-minded, law-abiding citizens who respond to the reports made, and in so responding, we operate within the parameters of the law. We operate within our parameters of our use of force policies, and you would be very mindful that in so responding on several occasions, you, the civic-minded citizen, have seen a proliferation of firearms and ammunition being utilized on our nation's streets, in our communities, on our highways, even by our churches, even in the hospital. So I would want to put context into what you are saying, and the context is simply this. We have taken over 400 firearms off of the street. We have taken thousands of ammunition off of the street. Yet more continues to oscillate within Trinidad and Tobago. You have a few number of persons who continue to go in and out of the justice system and continue to put pressure and stress on the civic-minded, law-abiding citizens in Trinidad and Tobago. You have the police responding. You have the court doing what the court continues to do in terms of the citizens what is just due to them. But is that really deterring them because they have chosen a life of crime? So when you speak to the gang and the police, it reminds me of a place we once were by an agency who spoke to us in that manner. So we have to be careful. The difference between us, civil society, and the criminals right now, it is the police. It is the police, right? And the incidents where police were involved in shooting are incident as police shooting. They are not killings by the police. The coroner's court will determine by an inquiry of facts as to what would have substantiated.
In that regard, I think, thank you for that last point in particular, in respect to police involved shootings and police involved killings. But at the same time, the civil society seems to be quite split on this, ASP. On one hand, I've heard of citizens who are supporting the TKBS saying that we need to get rid of these individuals one by one, those who are troubling society, those who are deterring civil society, as you mentioned. On the other hand, there are those who have expressed anger and frustration. The TGPS is never going to satisfy everyone, but let us address those with anger and frustration just for a moment. You mentioned use of force policy. Do you think at times that use of force policy could be deemed as excessive, particularly when you have these police-involved shootings with a number of officers not wearing body cameras at the time? And that is something that's been raised by PSA Director David West. PCA Director, my apologies.
Right. So let me say this again. The body worn cameras are separate and apart from the use of force policy. The body worn camera ought to give a depiction of what occurred. And we have departmental orders which address that. So the officers who did not utilize the body worn cameras, they in particular could be placed on a disciplinary charge, and that will be addressed. The issue here is police arriving on the scene. The issue also, which is compounded with that, is the fact that on most persons' homes right now, we also have cameras. The issue is on most streets we have cameras. The issue is even in persons' vehicles now we have cameras. So I want us to be clear. The footage attained by all these variables I just referred to there would be sufficient to carry as evidence, and a good investigator, a fair investigator, would also utilize that. So our issue in relation to the officer and the body worn camera, we have already ventilated and have some issues with that, but nonetheless, we, the association, continue to call on officers to use it because it is best practice. That does not equate to a gang. That does not equate to you are operating outside of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, because the officer did not pick up home and went to work with a mindset that I'm going to shoot someone today. The officers would have been out on a report, and in most instances have to respond. And I don't know, whilst civic society get the opportunity to look at after the fact an engagement with gunfire, and we could arrive at different positions. You picture a 5.56 ammunition as how the criminals have been utilizing it, passing by your head or by your child or your family head. And tell me if the first thing that will come to mind at that point in time would be your body worn camera. The first thing comes to mind is preservation of self, your colleague, and of the civic society. That's the first thing. And then the reality of the situation. So we oftentimes have all the answers when we are standing on the outside. And even with that, our answers seem to suggest we know what the police could do and how they do it. There is no excuse for us in terms of our attempts to want to bring persons before justice. The court continues to show we have been doing that. Right? We are not being applauded for that. We are being criticized for the engagement when we have identified there are more firearms out in the street. There are more ammunition out in the street. There's a breakdown in society. There are criminals who are prepared to go the extra distance. We are being criticized for what I might consider to be the minor of the major thing.
Fair point in respect to the minor of the major thing, but do you think that, given what you said, is it that the times that we're living in suggest that the TTPS and their response needs to be stepped up? And when I say stepped up, not only am I speaking about investigations and proactive police measures, but do you think that the use of force policy also, is it very difficult to even suggest it's excessive because police officers have no choice but to respond to these shootings with force themselves, with excessive force themselves? In other words, you're put between a rock and a hard place, as I mentioned in my introduction.
Oftentimes I wonder. I recall not too long ago, a young lady was kidnapped in Tinopuna. And I recall a ransom was demanded. I recall officers followed that case day in, day out. I recall the officers were able to have the lady returned safely. And I recall that the perpetrators were neutralized by the police. And some or the other, with all that recollection, what I recall the most is that the members of the public were shouting praises for the police and the efforts. That is why I recall them. We have a society right now who has not moved away from retributive justice. We have not escalated to rehabilitation or restorative justice. We are still there. We have a society that wants things a particular how and sees things a particular how. We have a society that is frustrated by what is occurring in Trinidad and Tobago, because especially where we have come from to where we are now. So that is why I would say the job of the police had to be a very thankless job. Thankless, because here you go, like others, focal point is whether the use of force policy was sufficient, whether our criminal justice system is providing sufficient penalty to deter the criminals and the would-be criminals from committing the act. The jury is still out on that. The jury is out on that. But the members of the public who is witnessing or who are witnessing seeing persons going in and out of the system and coming back out, then persons, one or two things. You hear gang violence, gang against gang, because they're taking justice into their own hand. You hear gang trying to extort from the civic minded. You hear persons have no confidence in the criminal justice system. All these things are occurring, and the magnifying glass is on whether the use of policy was sufficient. We need to start to have a different discussion. And the discussion should be, where are the other arms of civic-minded society in trying to address our crime scourge? When are we coming together? When are we looking towards change? Do we really want change? Or do we want exchange? Or we want bacchanal? We love bacchanal.
Well, Mr. Dixon, ASB Dixon, my apologies, sorry. In that regard, is it that the TTPS, I hear your points. I've heard your response in respect to my first question, in respect to that rumor or suggestion of assassins within the TTPS, and I've heard your response in respect
We
to...
don't have assassins in the TTPS.
Yeah, I've heard your response, and I'm glad you clarified that, because I was quite taken aback at such suggestions or rumors, which I myself can't verify, which is why I'm glad that you put your 2 cents into that as well. So, if I were to move forward with the conversation, based on what you said this morning, the TTPS are carrying out their functions and responsibilities. The TTPS is also evolving to meet the current day situation and the level of crime that Trinidad and Tobago is experiencing. And you are suggesting that we need to focus on other areas as well. So I hear your points in that regard. Is the TTPS receiving the necessary support from other criminal justice institutions? Is the TTPS, in other words, being blamed? Is this being used as the pawn as taking full blame for the current state that TNT finds itself in?
Well, I think once you ask that question, you also, your conscience saying, yes, TTPS is being blamed for the decay and the fallout in society. Yes, TTPS is being blamed for when there is a breakdown in the home and families can reconcile their differences and a murder occurs, we should be there. When there's a breakdown in the school and we are not there at the point in time and someone takes it upon themselves to seek their own justice and someone is fatally either stabbed or wounded to the extent that they subsequently die, TTPS get the blame. When there is shooting in front of the court or at the hospital or on the nation streets and byway or within the community, TTPS gets the blame. When the border has been as porous as it is, we get the blame. When our policies regarding migration and both our customs and immigration and the port are not being called upon to account, we get the blame. When the Coast Guard don't do what they have to do, we get the blame. When COVID was most rampant and we lost 39 officers because we could not stay home, we got the blame. When we had no PPE and had to submit ourselves to the same testing as everyone else who would have succumbed or got COVID, and there was no facility catered for the police, we got the blame. So, I think, and I honestly believe from where I am here, sufficient is not being done to work with the police and utilize a collaborated approach to be able to address what is taking place outside here. And then there's no recognition for the work being done by the police. So when we speak, we often ask for us to see something, to say something, to work alongside the police. That in itself continues to be efforts that we are trying to reap the benefits of. That in itself continues to be a work in progress. But at the end of the day, a lot more could be done in terms of all the entities being called upon to account, all the entities working together, both from the lens of our social services, our judiciary, the entities I referred to earlier there, and the police coming together. And the members of the public having belief in a system where we are trying to deter the criminals from perpetrating what is taking place and from making our country look as bad as we are looking, both locally and internationally.
In respect to the resources or the necessary support that the police service need, particularly at this time, what is it from your standpoint, from your view, that is quite essential and integral for policing at this particular time, that the TTPS, and I'm not speaking about support from other institutions at this point, I'm talking about the necessary resources for the Trans-Tobago Police Service that is very much required and might also help in the situation with respect to how the public still seems to be so divided in its viewpoints of the TTPS.
Well, let me just put on record, we are not a perfect organization, and unlike others, we don't come on the public airwaves and speak to our shortcomings or what is necessarily needed. But at this time, I would want to put on record, because of the prevalence of the high power weapons, we need, like yesterday, bulletproof vests. We need bulletproof vests like yesterday, and we need them to be able to withstand the heavy artillery that is outside there. That is one. We need our officers to be continually trained so that training kicks in all the time. There is no second guessing of your training. We need our physical resources to be at the level of best practice. Our buildings that need to be outfitted with the air condition to make it comfortable both for the members of the public coming in and for the officers who spend more time there than they spend with their family. We need it to be like that. We need those things to be addressed. We need our printers to be up and functional. We need our vehicles to be in readiness to be able to respond. So I identify about 5 things we need there at this point in time. I'll leave it there. But we need the authorities to understand we need these things.
That's quite generous of you to leave it there, DSP Dixon. Well, I want to thank you very much for joining me on the program this morning, and thank you for addressing some issues. I've heard a number of your points, and I do understand where you're coming from, because, as I said, I myself have been exposed to 2 parts of society where you're hearing more and more people supporting their TTPS in the operations because simply they're frustrated and, one less criminal on the road. That seems to be, and that's the reality, that's the situation on the ground. People do seem so frustrated that they are expressing that. On the other hand, there are those that are dissatisfied with policing, but as we mentioned, you wouldn't be able to satisfy everyone or make everyone happy. In respect to the support systems, well, surely that is definitely another conversation to be had. So thank you very much, ASB Dixon, for joining me on AM this morning. I appreciate your time as always.
Thanks very much, Mr. Shah. You be good.
Take care, sir. All the best.
Yeah.
In my introduction to the program this morning, I mentioned that there are rumors or suggestions of, and before I say this, ASP did clarify. He did put clarification in respect to the rumors of, and I'm using that word again because that's exactly what the rumor is, assassins. But he has clarified. He made it absolutely clear. Problem is, I'm trying to figure out exactly where this rumor started, because you have to. It's part of my job or my responsibility is always to peruse social media. I saw nothing of that fact on social media. I've heard nothing of that. So when I opened a daily newspaper in Trinidad, and we have one of three. I wouldn't call which one right now, but when I opened it and I read that particular article, I said, where has this rumor started? Where did this even come from? I'm not sure. So, to hear the opinions, and ASP Dixon feels quite strongly about it, because it does speak to the image of the TTPS as well. These are things that need clarification, ladies and gentlemen. You may be satisfied with the responses on the part of the ASP, you may not be satisfied, but at the end of the day, we ain't going to make everybody happy. It is frustrating, the situation that we're living in. We as citizens are quite scared for our lives, and that's reality. But I would imagine that the TTPS themselves aren't too happy with the situation. Although some might argue they ain't doing their part, or they ain't doing their job or their role as they should be. That's probably why we're in this situation. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot of factors, a number of factors, and a lot that contributes to this situation. But say something, do something. See something, do something. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a break here on the program. When we return, we'll continue the conversation. I have quite an intriguing one coming up next in respect to the decline of standard English. Whether or not English as we speak in the Caribbean, standard English is declining, or is it just simply evolving? We'll be right back after this.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage. And we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man
is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
This is Face of Sports, WESN Content Capital. How you felt about the kiss on the lip?
That's the business, I'm nothing to do with that.
I find that was distasteful.
The national senior team, whether you like it or not, that is the model for all other teams to follow.
I'm assuming that the regional requirement may be a much stricter requirement.
This is not about Pro League and Super League. This is a league run by the Normalization Committee that I'm responsible for.
Nobody expected FIFA to fund this arrangement.
If we don't get a professional attitude towards this, we are doomed for failure.
You break the balance, trip the leg, control the body.
They ain't gonna stand put
Why you
forever.
want the Chiefs to lose so? Why you want the Chiefs to lose so?
They already have two. Lamar don't
Why?
have.
You're jealous because you know the Chiefs getting closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No,
of the
not
game.
no.
Let's go to the last part.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Welcome back to AM Prime, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being with us this morning. I'm really excited for my next discussion. Something I've been wondering of for quite some time, and though you read so many articles and so many research papers and studies done on said topic that we're about to get into, you don't get that one-on-one conversation oftentimes. You don't get those perspectives or those arguments or opinions. You always get some analysis which in itself doesn't necessarily speak to you. That's why I prefer one-on-one conversations, and that's why we have AM Prime. Now, I'm speaking about the decline of standard English, and I am very cautious in even making such a statement, because there are those who argue that standard English, particularly in the Caribbean, is not declining, but rather the language itself, for its survival, is evolving. Now, standard English in the Caribbean is mainly used in writing and formal contexts. However, when it comes to oral communication, a dialect is oftentimes preferred. But generally speaking, there's no clear-cut sense of the continuum or what is the norm. So let's have a conversation about that this morning. I'm joined by an attorney at law, an individual who loves reading books. It's an individual who loves writing books now, an author. I'm joined by Ms. Celeste Mohammed this morning. Good morning, Ms. Mohammed, and welcome to the AM Prime.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. This is really going to be a very interesting discussion.
A very interesting discussion, and I'm going to put you straight to the point that I made in my introduction, and that is whether, in your opinion, are we seeing a decline in standard English? And when I say decline, I'm talking about in written, in oral communication, or is it just evolving for the sake of the survival of the language?
Yes, that's an excellent question. As you said, it's one that has been very hotly debated. I think that we can't talk about the state of standard English currently without understanding a bit of the history of English in Trinidad. And although English has been the official language of Trinidad since we became a British colony, which was around 1802, the truth is, standard English has never been the most widely spoken language or used language in Trinidad. It never has been. So as you rightly said, in sort of everyday discourse, people would speak different varieties of English. There have always been multiple Englishes in Trinidad due to our history. At one point, French was the most widely spoken language in Trinidad. And so what you had developing, because of our history, first being Spanish, then being British, all of these French people coming in, the Indian indentured laborers, the Chinese, the Portuguese, what you had developing was a spectrum of Englishes, right? At the highest, what we call the highest register, being the standard English that we would have been taught in schools immediately post, during the British time. And at the other end of that spectrum would have been it's almost unintelligible sort of patois or Creole. And in between those two poles, we learned how to slide and code switch depending on who you're talking to and what was the medium, whether it be written or oral. And I feel that what has been happening, this is just my my guess based on observation, and so what has been happening is that we probably started off with a spectrum that was like this in terms of Englishes, and it's now become this because of globalization, because of the internet, because of, you know, the modern generation, and the modern Trinidad English includes influences from so many other places. And so what has been happening is that I feel like perhaps the most modern generations are losing the ability, or they don't have need to slide to the upper registers and to speak, and they don't have access to that learning of the standard British English that I or you or, you know, our foreparents might have had. Because I'm not sure if the standard British English is the thing being taught in schools, or is the standard being required, or if that has laxed.
Because of that spectrum and how that spectrum has widened or expanded in time gone by, who decides what is deemed as standard English, particularly as a Caribbean people? If we have so many influences, who then decides, well, this is the proper way to speak English, this is the preferred way?
That's another good question, and in my house it has always been my mother who decides what is proper English. Yeah, yes. But you're raising a good point, because I think even at the university now it's a debated topic as to where is that highest form of English, because when in days gone by, you would turn on the radio and you would hear pronunciation. You'd hear words of almost like BBC presenters, right? What you hear on the radio now is very different, for the most part. So at one time, that was the standard that we were all trying to aspire to. I've heard that some schools have even change their policies in terms of grading, so that you get graded on the content, not on whether your spelling and grammar and so are correct. So if the schools are sort of moving the standard, then where does it lie?
We're speaking about tertiary institutions. I know that in the United Kingdom and in the United States, universities have now adopted what they refer to as inclusive assessments, where you're absolutely correct. Rather than, you know, an individual being marked for their spelling, their diction and their grammar, it's actually the content that is being focused on. But do we find ourselves, or could we find ourselves in a problem where we might, because of the expanse of communication, and though the basic English may remain the same, could this to a certain degree lead to communication barriers?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a practical aspect to it in that, okay, if you go to a Hispanic country and you can't speak a word of Spanish, or you can't speak it well enough, you won't be able to communicate effectively. Same thing, if we continue to go in the direction of young people coming up, you know, knowing how to sort of communicate in hieroglyphics by text, so all kinds of acronyms, BRB, IKR, whatever, and emojis. If that's how most of our young people are communicating, we might reach a point where we lose the ability to communicate, write, speak in the English that will make us able to connect outside of Trinidad and Tobago, you know, and that's really where the practical problem arises. I don't know if you've ever encountered tourists or persons visiting who say that they went into a store, and they could not understand what was being said.
I've encountered tourists who said that our dialect, we tend to speak so fast that we mince our words and it's very difficult to understand. So globalization is a factor to consider for the expansion of the spectrum, as you mentioned earlier. But then globalization is also a problem because of our communication with the outside world.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the beautiful things about being a Trinidadian, at least in the time when I grew up, was that ability to seamlessly code switch. So I would, in my home, my mother had, rules. So I would speak what we call proper English, and then I would go out and go in the country by my cousins or whatever, and I would speak a different kind of English, but I could make that transition seamlessly. I could write my exams in standard English. I could talk in, different fora, sliding seamlessly in between, but I think that is the problem. I'm not opposed to us using different forms of English, but I feel like we might be losing, some of us might be losing that flexibility and ability to code switch.
Well, that in itself is becoming a skill. As an author yourself, have you found yourself in that difficulty at times, whether it be doing research or writing your own documents, your own stories, your own narratives?
Yes, and that's another interesting story. I grew up in a home where standard English had to be spoken. I went to schools where that was the requirement. Then I went off to study law, right? Which uses the most archaic and formal English possible, right?
Yeah.
I actually think it's a conspiracy so that normal people can't understand, But anyway, so after all of that and 10 years practicing law, I go off to study creative writing in the US, which has a very informal approach to language. They drop the U in words. They don't spell like we do, like British English, So it was a shock to me at a tertiary level institution doing a higher degree, my master's in creative writing, to see how informal they were about English. So I ended up seeming like the weird one. And, my teacher saying to me, the way you write is so formal. Because that was what I was taught. So my early stories, I very much struggled to write in Trinidad Creole, because I had been taught that Trinidad Creole is never to be used for the written word. I struggled. I really did. And it was only when I was able to get past that sort of barrier and let the characters speak for themselves that I was able to write fluently in Trinidad Creole. And I'll tell you something, the first story of mine ever published, the first one to ever win an international award, is a story written entirely in Trinidad Creole.
Wow. Now, I hear what you're saying. There's something that piqued my curiosity, though, when you mentioned that you studied law, and they said they say you read for your degree when it comes to law, and then you decided to do a master's in English, and it's often suggested that that is the most difficult language to learn. But I'm just curious to know, not going off topic too much, but did you find your law degree more difficult to study or your master's in English?
Well, anything is difficult if you don't like what you're doing. So from that perspective, I always wanted to be a writer. I had reasons why I went into law, and so I was competent at studying, reading law and getting the degree, but I didn't like it. My master's is not in English, it's in creative writing, which is learning to use the language for a particular purpose in a particular way, right? And my heart was there. I very much enjoyed doing that. But I will tell you something. Since then, since getting my master's in creative writing and pursuing a career in writing, writing is actually more difficult, the creative writing aspect, writing the books and all that. I think that is more difficult than practicing law. I really think it is, because you're trying to wield language as a tool to accomplish so many things, to accomplish, you know, an emotional reaction in the reader, in many readers. It is hard, it is harder than practicing law, but I love it so.
Well, there's always a love, which is very, very important in whatever you do. But moving forward now with the conversation, you know, the suggestion that your first international award for, you know, your written work, your written material, it was written entirely in Trinbago dialect, as we see. So that suggests that the attitudes are evolving as well to meet or match the evolution of English as we're referring to it. So then, is the decline of standard English something that we really need to be worried about if the attitudes itself are working to match?
Yeah. I don't know how pervasive it would be, an attitude of, yes, just come and speak whatever you speak. I don't know how practical or pervasive that would be, but I would say certainly in literary circles, there has been a move to accept and to honor and to give a certain pride of place to languages and versions of English that are other than standard. I don't know if that's because, you know, it's like an exotic thing. Oh, look at this story written in some weird form of English. I don't know if that's what it is or what, but I will say that in literary circles, there is now a space for you to write in something other than standard English. But I will also add, there's a trick to it. You have to learn how to write in what appears to be Creole or something other than English, but it actually, and V.S. Naipaul talks about this in his work, there's a way, there's a trick, there's like a formula to know how to do it so that people outside of Trinidad are able to understand it. It's not just write the way we speak. You really do have to still craft the language to be understood by outsiders.
I think that's an excellent point that you've raised, because we were taught growing up, and I'm sure you were taught this as well, that how you speak is how you write, and how you write is how you speak. And that is something that was preached to us. But in respect to, let's just say, from basic skills growing up to the education system to now, is it that the teaching at those various stages are going to have to evolve as well? Or should we still be focusing on standard English, or as they say, and it's not a favorite term, but it's a term that's been used many times, the Queen's language, the Queen's English?
Mm-hmm. Well, you and I both know that that is just an empty expression, the Queen's English, because if you listen to the Queen or King Charles or whoever, what our English, even at its best, is not the same, right? Yeah. But it is an evolving conversation. I think in UWI, at tertiary level, like institutions, the debate has reached a point where they're considering Trinidad English and Trinidad Creole as a separate language, I shouldn't say a separate language, but a language in its own right. And so the question is being asked as to whether students should be allowed to submit written work in Trinidad English, in Trinidad Creole. That's the level that the debate has reached. Even in Belize, I lived in Belize and practiced law in Belize for 4 years, and there's a huge movement afoot to have Belize Creole considered as a language in its own right, and to be able to have that being used as the official language in some ways.
Because I don't know if you could see on the screen, the question I was asking is really, and I deliberately wrote it that way, how is Caribbean people supposed to talk?
Are we supposed to talk, boy?
Exactly. How are we supposed to talk? So because as you mentioned, it's in informal circles. You may find yourself speaking one version of English or one form of dialect, and then in more formal settings, you find yourself, am I pronouncing my words properly? Did I use that word correctly? You know, and by the way, simple little things like when we were growing up. Again, I go back to that. If I were to say the word 1, 2, 3, I would get told off for that. Huh?
What about this one? That's my one.
That's my one. Yes. And
or mines.
Well, there's no such thing as mines. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
There's no such thing as mines. And even when we go into our local sayings, our creative quotations, she's sweet too bad.
Yes. But you know where that comes from? That comes from, again, the almost literal English translation of French phrases, like it making hot. It making hot is a literal translation of the French for il fait chaud or whatever is or assez calor, it makes hot, whatever it is, but it's a literal English translation of a foreign phrase, and that is why we speak the way we speak, because I think we have to embrace that we've always been what we call a polyglot nation. We've always had all these different linguistic inputs. But I go back to saying, I feel like making the best use of that spectrum is treating and training our people how to continue to slide along it, to be able to communicate with practically anybody, you know, who speaks English. There's some people in Trinidad, I think, today who are more fluent because of dancehall music, more fluent in Jamaican English than standard English, just because of it being the thing that they hear most or exposed to. And there's nothing wrong with being fluent in Jamaican English. But can you, if the situation demands it, speak fluently in standard English? I think that's a skill that we have to encourage. We're encouraging, for years the government has been encouraging the implementation of Spanish as a second language. Well, let's work on English now.
I like this. Now, we are running out of time. I want to thank you for this conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and thank you for sharing your thoughts and opinions and your experiences with us. But I'd like to know more about your book, and particularly the book that you... There you go. Now, so, what is the title of that book?
Well, almost every man who has encountered the cover has said, pleasant view. Whereas others, it's pleasant view. It's pleasant view. That's the name of the book.
So, if you can, give us a synopsis of your book, of your writing.
So, Pleasant View was written during the time that I was doing my master's. It was my thesis. It's 9 interconnected stories set in Trinidad, in a community in Trinidad called Pleasant View that is modeled after a particular community that I will leave the readers to guess where. And it's not a well-to-do environment. It's, you know, it's not. And so we just follow the lives of these people as they go through their days, and I intended it to sort of be a microcosm of Trinidad. And it's written both in standard English and in Trinidad Creole. I go in between. Yeah, and it's meant to highlight a lot of the modern issues facing us in Trinidad. I've been told it's a fun read. Not fun in the light-hearted sense, but certainly fun. It's fun to see yourself, to see our culture reflected on the page.
Certainly. Where can we get a copy of this book to read? Where can viewers get a copy of this book?
Well, all the online places, but in Trinidad, I believe I've seen the book at Nigel Cann booksellers. I've also seen it at Paper-Based Bookshop, which is in St. Clair, and I'm not sure where else. Probably Tales and Treasures, Scribbles and Quills. I mean, just ask, but I know for sure Paper-Based tends to have the book all the time.
Paper-Based really is very much supporting of local authors.
Yes, yes. A huge resource, yes.
Definitely. So thank you very much for that. Well, I can certainly look forward to getting a copy of that book as well. And I'm glad that you before I even spoke to the title of the book, thank you very much for correcting.
No problem.
I think I find myself in a situation though with how things are evolving. Everything is constantly evolving. That oftentimes I wonder, and I've asked myself this question: if a word is spelled incorrectly in the dictionary, how could you tell? So think about that one for a moment. Ms. Mohammed, thank you very much for joining me on the program this morning. Thank you very much for your time. It certainly has been a pleasure, and I look forward to our next conversation. And I'm putting you on the spot. Your next week.
Yes, thank you for having me, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Certainly, all the best. Take care.
Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, we take a break here on the program. Think about all that has been put forward during this particular conversation. Stimulate your opinion, and you can reach out to us at AM Prime and tell us what you think. We'd love to hear from you. We'll return after these messages.
Transform your home with PCU Plus. From stylish furniture to the latest appliances, we have everything you need to create your perfect space. At PCU Plus, we offer fair prices and affordable financing options that are cheaper than hire purchase agreements. With convenient locations in San Fernando, Tobago, Arima, and our lifestyle showroom in Barataria, you're never far from the best deals. Visit PCU Plus today and discover why we're the top choice for quality furniture and appliances. PCU Plus. Quality you trust, prices you'll love. Visit one of our locations or find us online to start transforming your home today.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
Welcome back to AM Prime, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks once more for being with us. We've had a great discussion with Saswa on AM Prime this morning, and that doesn't end there. We're getting into another conversation. But a couple months ago, actually, I had Mr. Steve Alvarez on the program as we spoke about flooding and flood mitigation measures in TNT. And we spoke about the political will to actually achieve such. Unfortunately, it went in that direction because government after government, administration after administration, have presented us, or at least used the words, we're planning. In 2024, we're still planning, by the way, and I guess that's exactly what keeps the Ministry of Planning and Development running. I'm not sure what they should, but before I even get caught up in that, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome once more to the program Mr. Alvarez. Good morning, sir, and welcome back to you.
Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, thank you very much for joining us once more. Now, last year, the Minister of Works and Transport spoke to the fact that when he entered office, he had approximately 16 plans that go back to 1960 in respect of flood mitigation measures in Trinidad and Tobago. He also indicated that a study was being conducted by CAF, well, funded by CAF, in relation to a flood plan for Trinidad and Tobago. And by the way, I believe that study is still ongoing because we haven't heard anything much further since. But given your experience as an engineer and as a contractor, is Trinidad and Tobago's infrastructure so poor, is it so bad, that from the technical aspect, it's going to take a lot more than we think to actually achieve true flood mitigation measures?
Well, good on, Keaton. The last time I spoke to you, I indicated that the problem really was the political will to do something about it. Because, you see, there are the technical aspects of it, which we could perhaps look at. I'll give you an example. In the Manzanilla-Mayaro area, under both administrations, you've had a serious washout of the road. I think one administration was saying, listen, we were able to repair the road in 6 months, and the other one said we had to do it better this time, and the whole attention was to restoring the Manzanilla-Mayaro road. But to date, none of them, nobody has even spoken about how do you prevent that from happening again. Because you're going to have a situation at some point in our future where you're going to have similar rainfall, and all that water is going to rush onto that Manzanilla-Mayaro road. And there's absolutely nothing done on the if you're going down to Mayaro on the right side of the road, there's absolutely nothing done. And that is a fantastic area to have a catchment basin that can take that water and then slowly send it out to the sea. But nothing is done, and nobody cares about that. I mean, it's been decades upon decades where you have the Caroni River overflowing its banks. Now, anybody with 5 cents common sense will say, listen, if this happens year after year after year, we have to do something to allow that water that comes over the bank to go somewhere. And we have loads of land right there south of the Caroni River to allow for another catchment basin. So it's not that people don't know what to do, they just don't want to do it. And so let's talk about how difficult it is. How difficult it is to do a catchment basin. A catchment basin is just digging a depression into the earth to accept water. And to say that we don't know what to do because we've done one. We've only done one catchment basin, and that's in the South Key area under the previous administration. And it worked for years. And of course we never maintained it, But those are the answers, because it's you have to allow for the water to go somewhere. And one of the beauty of water is that when you capture it, it's a wonderful thing. It forms these nice man-made lakes. And I always say, people perhaps fed up hearing me saying this, but there are like thousands of these lakes in Florida. So when you go, you just see almost every development in Florida, there's a little man-made lake, and they make little fountains and stuff like that. It's not there just for the aesthetic value. It's actually there because the water table in Florida is so high that every time you have heavy rain, the water has to go somewhere. It cannot run out to sea. So they have all of these man-made lakes. Even along the roadways, they have these man-made lakes so that the water goes somewhere under heavy rainfall. Now that, to me, is not very technically difficult to understand. And that I ask myself, why don't we do it?
Are these water catchment areas something that, are they very difficult to construct and to maintain?
Well, as I said, the major thing for them is that...
particularly in expense, my apologies, go ahead.
No, it's a hole in the road and a hole in the earth. And one of the good thing is that in places like Penal and Barrackpore, a lot of the farmers have made their own catchment basin. So they in order to save their crop, they get an excavator and they dig these holes. And it turns out for them to be nice areas for things like tilapia and cascadoo and so on during the dry season, because it also allows for irrigation. So it's not a difficult thing. I think the problem with us as a country is that we have such very short memories. Like, for example, we don't maintain our schools, but every school season we spend millions of dollars. I mean, imagine we just had a situation of spending $10 million. That is 2 luxury homes that you could build with $10 million to repair a school in Barataria. So, but it only happens in the holiday season. So what you find is that we just do things for the moment. So every rainy season, we talk about pumps, we talk about how do we clear the waterways and so on. But in the dry season, you have 6 months where you can utilize those 6 months to prepare for the rainy season, and we don't do that. And then we deal with, I mean, it's just pathetic that every time you have a rainfall for about 20 minutes, that South Key floods. And you know, it did not happen for years because of the same catchment basin that they have in South Key. And then, of course, there was the big thing about draining the water just south of the Beetham Highway, where they had those 2 big pumps to pump the water into that area in Sealots. And I don't think you would have ever seen those pumps working. Is he? So,
no, in respect to our drainage infrastructure that exists in Transbago, we've spoken for years about having to upgrade our drainage infrastructure. It doesn't necessarily now meet the level of rainfall or the results of the rainfall that we are met with at times because of urbanization, because of planning, etc. We've heard of it before. But does a drainage plan coincide with a flood mitigation plan, or is this something that needs to be separate and worked on diligently as well?
Well, let me give you an example of different schools of thought. You have the situation at present where whenever we talk about drainage, we talk about box drains or we talk about clearing small areas, right? I want to take you back to almost a century ago when Port of Spain was not as developed as it is today. And around the Piccadilly Street area, on the foothills of the range, there was a drain. There's a drain that took the water, but it flooded a lot. And the British people built what is now known as the East Dry River. This is something like 30 feet wide and another about 30 feet or 25 feet deep. It's huge. So for most of the year, people play cricket in the dry river and so on because it's dry. It's called the dry river because it's a huge thing that just takes a trickling of water during the dry season. But in the rainy season, it comes all the way to the top. Now that is how you plan in advance for something that is going to happen. And that was what, 80, 90 years ago that they built that. We have not done any similar infrastructure in the Port of Spain area or anywhere else since the British did that. So it tells us that perhaps we're not thinking this thing through properly. We're not thinking right. As if we were, we would understand that we have to upgrade our drains to handle the capacity that is likely in a heavy rainfall. And we're not seeing that. We build drains that are based on regular rainfall, but we don't think about if there's a storm. I think I really am of the belief now that God has to be a Trinity, because I tell you something, we cannot as a nation, we cannot withstand a tropical storm, far more a hurricane. Because the rain that you get for 2 or 3 hours of heavy rain will wash away a lot of our towns and villages because we're just not prepared for it. And like you said, there's a study going on, or there may be a study going on, but you need more than a study. You need to start acting on those things now. I think what's gonna hopefully it doesn't happen, but if it does happen, what you would see is that immediately after you've had such disasters, you're gonna see all kind of plans coming into place at this minister meeting and this technical crew meeting and all that. And why not meet now? Why not deal with the fact that you have so much illegal squatting on the hills that in the event of a hurricane or a tropical storm, a lot of these houses will wash down because of landslides and so on. why aren't you doing something now in terms of retaining walls and so on to prepare for stuff like that? We don't prepare for anything, and that's a very, very sad indictment on our governance and our government and the way we look at things.
Now, pushing further to that particular point, we're not speaking about mitigation measures in respect to a response. We're talking about long-term planning and development as well. So in respect to institutions such as town and country planning, do they have a role to play in the situation that we find ourselves in?
Well, you know, it's amazing that we talk about planning. There's no planning. When you drive along the Ladion Road and you see people on both sides of the road putting up houses, and the matter of fact, there's the finish on the, if you're going from east to west, on the left hand side it's saturated with houses, so now they're going on top of the hill on the right hand side, and that is in full view of all government. So in terms of planning and development, well, you're planning. Then nobody cares about it until something happens, until there's some disaster. But that's what happens, and we have this similar situation in the Aripo forest in the east, where they've been illegal quarrying for years until something happens, and then if somebody comes and you see the aerial views, and you're not seeing a few lots or a few acres, you see hundreds of acres of land that would have taken over years to be destroyed and so on. So in terms of the planning and development, we don't do that. We don't properly plan our roads. We don't properly plan our water courses. We don't even properly plan our water distribution. We just do things half-heartedly, and that is not only an indictment on the government of the day. It's an indictment of we as a people in general. How do we, we've never sat down since independence and say, listen, how do we see Trinidad and Tobago in the long term? Because that would take a lot more than simply responding to put out fires. It would take planning. It would take serious or best minds coming together and say, how do we deal with the situations that confront us? And we don't have a situation like that. I think the major problem is that our politics has become so divisive that we can't find our best people coming together to work in the interest of our country.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I have to agree with you in respect to planning in Trinidad and Tobago, because I mentioned it in my introduction the last day, and I'm not so sure what the Ministry of Planning and Development is for. When we speak about planning in Trinidad and Tobago, it just seems to be a buzzword. Now, Mr. Alvarez, the situation that we find ourselves in 2024, with all the problems that have accumulated over the years, I know that you spoke about water catchment areas and how it's essentially, to put it plainly, digging a hole. It's a lot more than that, but we're just speaking in plain terms now. However, where do we even start? It's going to be an ongoing project. It is going to take a while, and it's going to take some resources. Where do we start? What is the first thing that we need to do in respect to first measures of response?
Well, let's look at what happened. I think it was John Humphrey who did something at one time. One of the first things that he did is that he cleared the waterways at the river, at the mouth of the river. And of course, I might be too young to remember that, but what happened is that immediately after he started clearing the waterways at the mouth of the river, because what happens is that over the years, silt builds up, and the water runs off very slowly into the sea. So as a result of that, you find during high tide and so on, you have lots of flood and so on. So by simply doing that, there was a lot of controversy, because they're saying he's destroying the shellfishes in the area and he's destroying the mouth of the rivers and so on. But that was the first thing that they did. And then also, by clearing the waterways alone, it reduced flooding by about 30-40%. So you have to start somewhere, and you have to start by clearing your waterways. If you go to Moruga, for example, there are just two major rivers in Moruga, and both of them are filled with bamboo and things and broken trees and all that kind of stuff. So if you start by clearing the waterways, immediately in a heavy rainfall, you're going to have that water washing out to the sea.
Well, sorry to protect you, but the government, in all fairness, they have done that. Major waterways, we have seen them clearing the waterways and dredging. I mean, I've seen that myself. Is it that it's not enough in your
Well,
opinion?
it's dredging where? I'll give you an example. In the Digicel River, for example, there's the clean upstream in the river. But if you just drive to the Westmoreland area, on the right of it there's silt all the way down to the sea. And that's never been cleaned. So the water just stops right there. And that's easily cleaned because you have the equipment to do that. But there's never been any attempt to do that. There was a time when the area in Sealots, right off the lighthouse, that area was cleaned and dredged at one time. And that would have been at least 10 years ago. So it's an ongoing effort. But you see, one of the things, Keaton, you have to remember is that at the last local government election, the government spoke about local government reform. And to justify what they wanted to do, they said, listen, property tax would go directly towards local government reform. Local government have a better understanding of the problems and the solutions when it comes to flood alleviation. Now that people have started paying their property taxes and so on, you have not heard anything about local government reform. So that money is going right into the coffers of the Treasury instead of going to the local government bodies to deal with issues like flooding and bridge repairs and road repairs and so on. So it's a matter of people just talking, but you have to do things in the local context as well. And those people, the people in places like Toko and Matlock, places that we only go for vacation, places like Guayagorari, places like Pinal and Barrapo, Cedros, all those areas, it's the local people that understand what the problem is, and it's the local people that has to deal with it. And you have to do that through local government reform, through empowering local government to deal with flooding. Instead of sitting down and having a study and having people in Port of Spain sitting down and tell you what to do, you need to get the people on the ground to start doing things because it's their interest as well.
Well, Zavers, I hear you on that point. I'll give you an example, and he's saying speak to the residents on the ground. Baltain has always been known to flood when rain falls. However, following the construction of the Curab interchange, between Kedon, where Kedon used to be, the Kedon roundabout, residents in Baltain have indicated that even though we used to experience flooding before, the extent of which they are experiencing it now is ridiculous. And they're of the opinion, they believe it's something to do with the bypass, because even though that there was a catchment area that was constructed, nobody's entirely sure where all that water is going to or where water is being pushed to. So oftentimes residents are of the opinion that it's linked somehow to the Curab interchange, and you have to wonder sometimes whether or not it is, because it helps with traffic. But in constructing these things, do we think about flooding and drainage as well? So it's just one example of speaking to people on the ground, which, by the way, the Minister of Works and Transport is a resident in Baltain, so he'll know the flooding that Baltain experiences. But we've spoken, we always look for someone or something to blame. I know that's always been the attitude. Mr. Alvarez, what about us in respect to personal responsibility? In respect to citizens, what are the basic things that we need to do or practice in respect to helping the situation with flooding?
Well, let me start by saying that, again, it might say, look, it comes back to us, but it really goes back to the structures that are put in place. When you look at any time you have flooding, you see a whole lot of plastics and so on going down the river, and you see a whole lot of stuff going on. Now, within a week, the government can make a decision that recycling becomes a part of our country. Almost every developed country in the world, you have 3 bins. You have a bin for plastics, a bin for your regular trash, and a bin for glass. All right? And they have different days of picking up plastics, trash, and glass. Now that's not a difficult thing for us to do, and I'm sure every homeowner will have absolutely no problem throwing their plastic in the plastic bin and having it pick it up. But instead, there's nothing like that in our laws, nothing like that in our structure. So again, it comes back to how we plan. And when you talk about the Curab interchange, for example, that's an engineering issue. Have we looked at where the water is going and what is required? And I told you before, and I used the East Dry River as an example, that you have to do capacity that's going to be exceeding what you anticipate, as was done in the D's driver. So if you understand that, you'll understand that for years to come, you have to always think in advance of years to come. And we have not been doing that. We have not been planning properly. But I think it all goes back to our desire and determination to fix Trinidad and Tobago. And right now, our focus, politically and otherwise, seems to be on winning elections rather than fixing our country.
Well, Mr. Alvarez, we are planning, but we are not planning properly. And I hear you many a times. The simple little things like when we are planning these major infrastructural developments, thinking about where the water is going to go, it seems as though that is put on this sideline. Mr. Alvarez, thank you very much for your time this morning. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for sharing your thoughts and opinions, and also giving us an idea how simple and easy it can be to implement such measures. Thank you very much, sir.
But thank you, Keaton. Thank you, Trinidad and Tobago. Have a wonderful day.
Take care. Take care. Mr. Steve Alvarez joining me on the program this morning, ladies and gentlemen. That example that I used in respect to the flooding situation in Balasin, it is something, as I said, Trinidad and Tobago, we experience flooding all over. What happens is that when you have infrastructural developments and there's not much planning, or the planning is rather poor, it tends to have knock-on effects. So everywhere across TNT experiences flooding. But when the infrastructural development actually adds to the woes that we experience, that suggests that we have an attitude of we simply don't care. Remember, the more and more this happens, the more and more difficult it is going to be in the end to try and resolve it. And the more and more costly it's going to be. So political will is something that you have to look at as well, because as a government, would I rather spend $120 million on building a catchment area, or $120 million in, I don't know, creating a new home for the steel ban? Now, one might argue the steel ban need a home. It's been years. Finally they have a home. It's very hard to debate those individuals because we have this attitude. We don't have an attitude. Sorry, we don't have an attitude of priority. We just have an attitude of throwing money and hoping it works. When I spend $100 million on throwing money at the defense force to help with crime, again, I don't know where that money is going, or would I rather spend $100 million in ensuring that all my schools are functional, operational, and in a place where we can ensure that classes happen, so that the future of Trinidad and Tobago has every single opportunity. Yeah, sure, we need to help with crime, but where has that $100 million gone to? What has it done? Has it even been given $100 million to defense force? So think about it. When we speak about planning in Trinidad and Tobago, we have to speak about priorities as well. And unfortunately, we get lost in translation. Ladies and gentlemen, that signals the end of AM Prime. Thank you very much for joining me on the program this morning. Thank you very much to all my guests, and thank you, the viewer, for joining me. As always, it has been a pleasure. On behalf of my team in studio, Joash Alexander, Joash has been enjoying his coffee on the early mornings. He's looking forward to having to retire from early mornings very, very soon. And to Milewood, thank you very much for all of your hard work and continued dedication. And of course, to Ms. Naomi McNish for her production, to the entire team at WESN, and those who have stayed and stuck with WESN, thank you very much for your continued presence and your hard work. I'm Keaton Shaw. Today is a good day to have a good day, and we'll see you again very, very soon. Bye-bye.
WESN
Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Transform your home with PCU Plus. From stylish furniture to the latest appliances, we have everything you need to create your perfect space. At PCU Plus, we offer fair prices and affordable financing options that are cheaper than hire purchase agreements. With convenient locations in San Fernando, Tobago, Arima, and our lifestyle showroom in Barataria, you're never far from the best deals. Visit PCU Plus today and discover why we're the top choice for quality furniture and appliances. PCU Plus. Quality you trust, prices you'll love. Visit one of our locations or find us online to start transforming your home today.
National Football Stadium. The tour also includes stops in Papua New Guinea, East Timor, and Singapore.
It may be the world's most populous majority Muslim country, but Pope Francis's visit to Indonesia has been much anticipated.
Honestly, I have a different religion, but I like it. It means being together. The union. It means mutual respect. That's what I like. I'm pleased he's coming to Indonesia.
Aged 87 and in waning health, Pope Francis has embarked on a 12-day, 32,000-kilometre tour of Southeast Asia. His first engagement will be an address to political leaders on Wednesday. One major theme will likely be climate change in a city struggling with air pollution, flooding and sinking land.
I strongly support the church bringing up more issues around pollution. That way the congregation is more aware of the importance of healthy and fresh air.
And on Thursday, the pontiff will hold meetings at the largest mosque in Southeast Asia with leaders from the country's 6 official religious communities, where interfaith tolerance will be high on the agenda.
It is a joy for our country, especially for us Catholics. Hopefully the Pope's visit can build religious tolerance in our beloved country of Indonesia.
8 million Catholics live in Indonesia, a 97% Muslim country. As such, a major focus of the visit will be promoting dialogue between Islam and Christianity at a time when religious animosity is on the rise in the country. While in town, the Holy Father will also say outdoor mass in a stadium of 80,000 seats. His epic voyage will then take him on to Papua New Guinea, East Timor and Singapore.
Now, this week in France is the famous rentrée. It's the period where children in the country get back to school and parents often return back to the office. And if you're in the French capital today, the post-holiday blues are no doubt a real thing given the gloomy weather we are experiencing today. To talk more about this phenomenon, we can bring in Elizabeth Richard, a clinical psychologist and trainer. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24 today. What explains this feeling one has of getting back to work after a long holiday period?
Well, the main reason why we would experience post-vacation blues would be because when we are on a holiday, when we are on a vacation, it's a change from our daily routine. And this is especially true the longer the holiday, and with people doing a lot of activities, sometimes things that they never do. And it's even increased if we travel to a different country, because then we get to experience a different culture. So it's basically like a huge life change over a couple of weeks. And so coming back to work, coming back to school is like a readjustment to our routine. So it's quite similar, I would say, to a feeling of loss that we can experience, which explains why when we come back from vacation, we can experience symptoms that are similar to depression, even though it's not depression.
Is it because one's lives, our lives generally in society, when we have jobs and have to take public transport and, do things which not all of us like to do, laundry, cooking, what have you, it's too monotonous, too routine? Is that it?
Yeah, that definitely has an impact. I also, we also know that when we are on holiday, we kind of have this different perspective on our daily lives. So we can see a little bit better what's not going well and what we don't like about it. And we tend to focus on that too much when we get back from our holiday. So we're really gonna need this readjustment. But yeah, the fact that during our holiday, we mostly do pleasurable activities, and being back to our routine can definitely be the main thing. The other thing is that our brain kind of tricked us to forget all of the bad things that can happen during holiday, because no experience is perfect, right? So we might experience delays, we might experience conflicts, things like that, but we're going to forget all about it and only going to remember the good things. So it's going to amplify this blues effect after coming back to our daily routine.
Yeah, interesting point. I want to talk about holidays for a second more, because here in France, vacations are sacrosanct. They're really important. Some people take them in July, most take them in August. The US has a very different view when it comes to vacation time. Is one approach better than the other?
Well, the truth is, the longer our holiday is going to be, the deeper it's going to be challenging to return to work. So the fact that we only take 2 weeks at a time is definitely going to decrease the impact. But then that also means that you have less time to rest. There's no perfect rule here, because when you take 1 month of holiday, because it takes us at least a week, and for some people a couple of weeks, to really disconnect from work, having a long time can be beneficial because we have more time to rest. But then it's more challenging to come back. So there's no perfect deal, unfortunately, and it's very, very specific to each individual, right? There's no general rule. So for some people, doing only 2 weeks is good because they quickly disconnect from work. For some other people, they would need more time. So this is something that's really important to approach on a more, I would say, individual perspective.
Now, after COVID, we have quite a few people who work from home. Some people have a hybrid working situation where they do a couple of days in the office, a couple of days at home. Does that flexibility help in getting over the post-holiday blues?
I mean, again, general information here, because it's very specific to each and every person. I think it can definitely be helpful when you come back from your holiday if you're working from home, because you get this kind of buffer that you might not have if you go back to work. But if you do go back to work and if you do go back to the office, then you can meet with your coworkers face to face, share your experiences about your holiday, which can help you keep, this kind of positive feeling a little bit longer. So it's really going to be an individual thing, and I would definitely advise people to do like what